Thank you, Jackie and Wendy and your committee here. It's really exciting for us to be here today and to be in a place where we don't have any clients. So I thought I'd make that really clear from the beginning. We've got more than 60 clients across New Zealand. We tend to get the worst bullying cases. So I just want to upfront acknowledge the fact that you've all come here willingly today, and hopefully, and I believe you're here to try and get some tools around how to address the issue. It's actually a lot simpler than you think, and I hope you go away with some tools and some ideas around that. But I'd like to thank Jackie and Wendy in particular and the committee for inviting us here. We've been really spoiled. We've been put up by Kerry and Bob and with this ocean view, and we've been really well looked after, greeted at the airport. So Nelson's a place I've only ever driven through, and Joanne hadn't been here before, so really impressed with the place, the feel, the friendliness, even the layout of the town, and you'll probably expand on that a bit too, Joanne. But the topic of workplace bullying is, and this is the interesting thing for me, it's where domestic violence was about 30 years ago. It didn't exist, we didn't talk about it, and there was this whole underlying thing that was something that we didn't want to admit or acknowledge. And I think the biggest thing that's happened in the last 2 years that's impressed me is there has been discussions. People are starting to talk about it, and by the end of this session, hopefully you will understand that you can each go home, do something in your own workplace, do something for yourself, for your friends. It's really simple. So having an opportunity to be at the top of the cliff and giving people help to address the issue is really exciting for us, because a lot of the time we're dealing with some of the worst bullying cases in the land, because when it gets too hard, we get the cases. And we end up doing a lot of advocacy work. We were in Auckland on Monday, Wellington, I was in Wellington on Tuesday. The cases where the matter has progressed, and every one of the cases we end up at mediation at, and the MB mediation, and I do about 1 or 2 of those every week across New Zealand. Every one of those that have been dealt with within the workplace at a very low level, every single one of them. And I noticed that there's a lot of HR practitioners here today, health and safety people, managers, all those people. One of the first messages I want to lead with is try to deal with cases at a low level. Because at the low level, it's easy. Once people take positions and it becomes adversarial and you get denial and an unwillingness to deal with things, so that's a major issue. So I guess that is the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the bit that people haven't been talking about, like they did about domestic violence. So in Wellington this week, and I'm not going to name the organisation or the union, but the matter had been ongoing for 18 months, and the union told our client not to raise the word bullying because it wouldn't help. So you had a situation where an employer really didn't know what the issue was. It wasn't identified and presented in the right way, and so that was a major problem. So we came in on Monday, having never met our client or who support people. Joanne had done the paperwork behind it, so if you want the clever person that can read all the detail and pick out the issue, it's Joanne, it's not me. We resolved that and got a perfect resolution in a matter of less than 4 hours. In fact, we got the resolution within 2 hours, and that was almost unheard of. And it should have taken 18 months of a whole lot of issues for both parties to get to a point where you could resolve it. Often the relationships are too damaged by that stage. In this case it wasn't. So the first point is, Don't try and hide it, don't pretend it doesn't exist, acknowledge it, talk about it, and that's probably 2/3 of the way to actually resolving it. Okay, in your handouts, you're all, the one piece of paper that I believe is the key to it, it's double-sided, yep, that's the one, double-sided. So, when you hear people talk about somebody being a strong manager, if they really believe they're a strong manager, ask them to go to their staff, look at that list, the strong manager, authoritarian manager and bullying, and ask them to get a vivid highlighter and highlighted behaviours or the attributes that they believe their manager's got. And that pretty much answers the question. So often people say, well, he's a strong manager, whereas in actual fact, he may well be authoritarian or a bully. So that's a useful tool, really useful. And for each of you yourself, you can look at it and think, which category do I believe my manager falls into? So that's something really, really simple. And to me, that's an important piece of paper. And I guess one of the saddest things for New Zealand was there was a pioneer with Workplace Bullying Champion. That matrix is out of a book written by Adrian Needham called Workplace Bullying. So a decade ago, she wrote the book and she was championing the cause, but unfortunately she got lung cancer and died, and that was really sad. So we had one person out there that was actually a workplace bullying champion, and when I first started looking for people with knowledge around workplace bullying, that was the first person I looked for, because I had a copy of that book, and I was using all the information that she provided, all those areas of help and support, and there was a matrix in there that talked about, well, actually described the workplace bullying behaviours, and that's the other part. I'll probably do it now. If you turn that page over, and this is the most important thing, that's a secret to what we do, so once we tell you it's not a secret. This book here is, and how many people have actually seen that? Okay, not many. Okay, this is the best document I've seen in my entire lifetime, and I've been involved in industrial relations for 43 years. It was written in... Can
you just say what book it's please?
Yeah, it's the... it was issued in February 2014 by Culturesafe New Zealand. I call it the Workplace Bullying Guidelines, Best Practice Guidelines. It's actually preventing and responding to workplace bullying. That all the answers are there. It tells you what it is. It tells you what you need to do if you're a employee or an employer. It's absolutely amazing. So this came out in February 2014. When it came out, it's the first document in my lifetime, comprehensive document that's been issued by a health and safety agency that talks about workplace bullying. So it's amazing, and we're going to, I think Jackie sent the link to that. So it's available online, so it's amazing. But on page 7, it describes the behaviours. So, I'll let you talk to it.
So that's page 7. But you've also all got it on the other side of that.
Yeah, so if you look at the behaviours.
From your handout.
Okay, so in amongst all the questions that you've asked us today, how do you know what it is? So workplace bullying is those behaviours, repetition of those behaviours, and a detrimental impact on the person. So if somebody comes to you and you're an HR or wherever you are, or if you're somebody that believes you've been bullied, grab a vivid highlighter, and somewhere we've got the one, who was that in the book? And we'll give you this as well. This is a real one from somebody. So if you can show them that, Joanne, that's a real person who looked at that list, had a highlighter and highlighted the behaviours that they believed that they'd experienced. So if somebody comes to you, you give them that blank piece of paper, the one with behaviours on, highlight it and watch them. Don't interrupt, just let them complete it. When they complete it, ask them for examples of. And that will give you a clue straight up as to whether or not there is bullying going on. Because those behaviours, WorkSafe have identified as behaviours that are not legitimate management behaviours. If it's only one or two, okay, that can happen. But when you see a significant number, that gives you the bigger picture. And what we need people to do when they see somebody come to them and believe they're bullied, and Joanne is going to talk about this later on. Whatever you do, don't just ask them for an example, trivialise it and send them on their way. Which is why the way we do it, you get the big picture. You understand immediately there is an issue. Now, I said it's what they believe they've experienced. So that doesn't mean it is. But, and we'll talk about it later on when the slide comes up from MacLennan, the way the legislation works and psychological harm sits under the new Health and Safety at Work Act, it's the perception of the person, because that's what drives them to become unwell. So this here is one of my first clients. So he was actually a member of the union I belonged to when I was a head union delegate, and he complained about being bullied at Hamilton City Council. This is all public knowledge, and that's out of the newspaper, but he complained about being bullied. Instead of addressing the issue, they turned on him, victimised them, and eventually made his position redundant, which doesn't sound that bad, but when you consider that only 2 years before they'd recruited him from England and paid $30,000 to bring him up over to New Zealand and set him up, it was a bad example. So what I wanted to do, and what my union was unable to do, was to run a case to the Employment Relations Authority and the Employment Court. Did that deliberately because I wanted to prove some stuff, and managed to prove it. It wasn't a good thing that I proved, but it highlighted the fact that the Employment Relations Authority and the Employment Court are not good for dealing with workplace bullying. And that's another story. But we're lining up now, aren't we, Joanne? One case a week. We're sitting on about 20 cases, and we're just writing them up. So watch the news over the next month or two, because we're for employers who are denying and want to get adversarial, we are actually going that path. Where we want to be is where we are today. We don't want to ever see any of you across the table, not one here. So that proved a point. So we actually highlighted deficiencies in the system, and that's what we were looking for. Right, this is the article, and can we provide the link to this as well? So this is an article written by May Chen, who is one of Chen Palmer. So she's in partnership with Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who was, let's say, Prime Minister actually, but he was a key constitutional lawyer. So the good things that have happened in my lifetime, the Prime TV documentary on workplace bullying, which got it out in public, the workplace bullying guidelines, which if everybody had a copy of, there'd be no workplace bullying now. And this particular article, which was in New Zealand Herald on the 4th of April this year. And for those of you involved in health and safety, you'll know that was the day that the new health and safety legislation came into effect. So the Health and Safety and Work Act 2015 came into effect on the 4th of April. What May Chen says here is psychological harm is going to be the new frontier for health and safety, because physical harm people understand, psychological harm people don't. And so most of you in this room, and that's why we're particularly excited about the mental health forum inviting us, and that's Joanne comes from a mental health background, and she's going to talk about the connection between the bullying and the mental health issues. So Chen quite clearly highlights the fact that it's an issue. The penalties are increased significantly under the new Act. What's going to start happening is that bad employers that don't deal with the issue are going to end up facing some really punitive penalties as a result. What we don't want you to do is to work on dealing with workplace bullying because you're afraid of the repercussions. What we want people to do is understand that you do it to make your work environment safe and a happy place for people to work. And as Jackie said earlier on, you get so many benefits from an environment that's positive and free of workplace bullying. You end up with less absenteeism, less sick leave, less staff turnover, high levels of engagement, higher productivity, all of the things that are just logical. And so I guess that's the other part is, rather than be afraid of penalties, do it for the right reason. Do it because you care about your staff. Every employer says we care about our staff, our most valuable resource, but a lot of people don't. The fact that we haven't been to Nelson yet suggests that the issues here aren't as bad as everywhere else. So some other legislation, and we might send a link to that, Jackie, is the research that was conducted by a number of professors of psychology, and it was done in 2009. But that's the research that showed that 1 in 5 New Zealanders has experienced bullying in the previous 6 months. And that documentation is nationwide, and the researchers for that are, a lot of them work in the Culturesafe bullying guidelines, references that research. So as New Zealanders, we've done little research, but if 1 in 5 workers across New Zealand has experienced bullying in the last 6 months, if you've got some bullying in your workplace, it's not that you've got something wrong with you, you're just part of the overall culture of the country. So don't ever think people are going to attribute blame to you if you put your hand up and admit that you do have some issues going on. So it's about that brave person that talked to Joanne, and Joanne will talk about him, because it's so refreshing to hear somebody put their hands up, admit they've got a problem, and how do we help resolve it. So that's really important. So this is the end for me in terms of workplace bullying is black and white. You get those bullying behaviours from page 7. Those highlighted repetition of detrimental impact on the person, and that's easy to gauge. Doctors, psychologists, anybody can actually determine that. That's what gets it to a bullying threshold. So it's simple to find out if somebody's been bullied. We'll talk a bit later on about what happens when somebody comes to you and it's really obvious they've been bullied, but I think I've just about run out of breath now. Joanne, number 2.
I was thinking, my God, that's a first. Thank you all for being here today. It's absolutely fabulous that we've actually got this setting where there's a focus on hope and there's a focus on change for the future. And that's with the backdrop of the fact that Allan and I work with some of the worst cases in New Zealand to resolve and manage workplace bullying, and we've seen the significant detrimental impacts that it's had on all of our clients, basically. And there's an interesting resource, and I was just shown this yesterday, and you've all been given a copy of it, and it's over here as well, and it's got these 5 ways to well-being. And I was looking at this 5 ways to well-being and thinking to myself that what we actually see at the end stage of a person combating workplace bullying or attempting to combat workplace bullying is those 5 ways to well-being is something that a person starts with pre-bullying and is something that gets depleted over time. So if we look at being active, we have people, healthy and well people are active. They're connected. They're giving, they're taking notice, and they're engaged in learning and professional development and all those kind of things. And what we see is over time, as they're combating an issue of workplace bullying in their environment, is they're actually losing the capacity to remain engaged. Their self-esteem, their self-confidence is dropping significantly. And by the time, and this is a really important part that I want to make sure that you hear this message, is by the time a person approaches their manager or approaches HR or health and safety or anybody at work, they have already got to a point where they've tried to use their own resources and they've tried to use their own knowledge and their capacity to cope has actually gone. And they're asking for help because they don't know what to do anymore. And that's part of the distressing, and this is where I refer to workplace bullying as becoming traumatising, because not only have they experienced really quite negative behaviours, like Allan pointed out, they're not legitimate behaviours in the workplace, but by the time they come to ask for help, if someone belittles that experience, or someone says, oh, it just sounds to me like there's a personality conflict there, you need to go and sort yourselves out together. That's akin to saying, how about you go and face your aggressor? And we would never say that to someone who's being physically hurt by someone, and we shouldn't say that to someone who's being psychologically harmed by another person. So I just lost my train of thought then. So hopefully it's all making sense to you so far, in the way that the harm that's being caused by someone and approaching the HR or health and safety is actually the end stage for them, and they really do need that help and support. I'm going to hand it back to Allan now.
We have a radio show that we do weekly, and we kind of do the Laurel and Hardy thing, and there's probably not enough old people in this room to remember Laurel and Hardy, but we try to cover both aspects of it. I guess what I want to ask you, Joanne, so I'll ask you so you'll know what I want you to say. Tell me about Pete.
Oh, now this is it's a hugely inspirational experience that I had earlier on this year, because like you said, a lot of the cases that we deal with are with employers that are quite keen to act like ostriches and keep their head in the sand about what's happening in their environment. But this particular, he was a chief operating officer of a huge organisation, and what we had was a case of a client who for 6 years had been kept in a position where he wasn't able to go through any professional development, any professional growth. He was placed on shifts that made sure that he wasn't interacting with people during the day, so he was always put on night shift. He was spoken to in a manner that showed that they didn't value or respect him. He actually started off, because he came from overseas, he actually started off as a proficient person in his profession with highly specialised skills. But 6 years later, he was being signed off his appraisal process as being at his basic level. And this was a gentleman now who was coming up to his 60s. So what he'd gone through is a complete depletion of his worth and his value in the organisation. And he was feeling it. He was absolutely feeling the effects of lowered self-esteem, lowered self-confidence, and not wanting to put himself forward anymore. There was no point. He didn't apply for training anymore. He knew it was going to get declined every time. And he just, and he'd been supported by the PSA the entire time, and nothing had changed. So meeting the COO, this Chief Operating Officer, and sitting across the table, he knew nothing. He knew nothing about this particular person. But before my client got to even say a single word, he said, our organisation has got a really bad history of workplace bullying, and an even worse history of managing it. And for that, I apologise.